It started with a plain black envelope on my doorstep, sealed with crimson wax. No return address, just my name scratched in spidery ink. Evan Wilder. I hesitated before breaking the seal, expecting some gimmicky Halloween party invite. But inside was something far stranger. You are cordially invited to experience the mystery of Blackthorn House. Enter if you dare. Midnight, October 31st. No phones. No turning back. The handwriting looked old. The kind you'd see in dusty ledgers from another century. I turned the paper over blank. A weird thrill crawled up my spine. Blackthorn House was a local legend, a decaying mansion deep in the woods outside town. People said it was cursed, that its last owner vanished without a trace in the 1920s. I should have tossed the invitation. I didn't. Halloween night was cold and moonless. Fog coiled around the forest road as I drove, headlights barely cutting through the murk. The GPS signal dropped miles back, leaving me with fading memories of old stories about the mansion. When I finally spotted the rusted iron gate, my heart skipped. Blackthorn House loomed beyond like a forgotten nightmare, its weather-beaten facade twisted by shadow. The front doors creaked open as I approached, though I saw no one there. I called out, my voice swallowed by the stillness. Silence. Steeling myself, I stepped inside. The interior was a preserved relic of the past. Cracked wallpaper, tarnished chandeliers, and dusty velvet drapes. A fire crackled faintly in the hearth, but the room felt ice-cold. On the mantel, a clock ticked loudly, 2 minutes to midnight. Then the front doors slammed shut behind me. Before panic could set in, an old gramophone rasped to life, playing a warped waltz. A voice crackling with static hissed, "Welcome, brave guest. Solve the mystery, and perhaps you will leave. Fail, and stay forever." A cold sweat broke across my back. This wasn't a party. It was something far older, darker. The first clue was pinned to the grandfather clock. Time runs thin. Find the lost before it strikes 12 again. I wandered through the dim halls, every creak of the floorboards making me flinch. Faded portraits of somber-faced ancestors stared with accusing eyes. At the end of the hall, a child's voice whispered from the dark, "Help me, I'm lost." I froze. It sounded like it came from the nursery. Heart pounding, I pushed open the door. Dust-choked toys littered the floor, and an ancient crib sat beneath a cobwebbed window. The room was empty, until the mobile above the crib started spinning slowly, playing a tinny lullaby. I backed out fast, but the door slammed behind me. The fireplace in the nursery roared to life, illuminating a new message scrawled in ash on the wall. "Find the missing piece." Desperate, I rifled through the room, scattering ancient toys. Then I saw it, half hidden under a rotted rocking horse. A porcelain doll, cracked and yellowed with age. Its eyes were missing. As I lifted it, the air grew colder, and I heard the soft patter of bare feet behind me. A giggle, high and sharp, filled the air. I spun around. No one. Suddenly, the doll's missing eyes rolled out from under the crib, landing near my feet like marbles. The whisper returned, "Put them back, or stay here, forever." With shaking hands, I fixed the doll's eyes in place. The air warmed briefly, before the house shuddered violently, like a living thing in pain. A trapdoor yawned open beneath the crib, revealing a spiraling stone staircase plunging into darkness. I had no choice. The air reeked of damp earth as I descended. Cold fingers brushed my arms, and shadows flickered just beyond the edge of the guttering candle I held. The steps ended in a cavernous basement. At its center stood a circle of ancient stones, runes carved deep into their surface. And there, within the circle, was the same porcelain doll, now towering and twisted, its hollow eyes burning with a dim, awful light. Its voice echoed, "You should have stayed away. But now you're part of the game." The clock chimed midnight overhead, but its toll sounded far away, like it was coming from another world. The stone circle shimmered, trapping me in a spinning vortex of flickering memories and faces. I realized then, this was the heart of the house. Every person who had ever tried to solve its mystery had failed. They were still here, trapped, bound to its curse. Blackthorn House never wanted me to solve anything. It wanted another soul. I staggered backward, breath hitching, but the walls of the cavernous basement seemed to shift, closing in. The flickering runes in the stone circle pulsed in time with the slow, relentless ticking of that cursed clock, somewhere far above or maybe deep within my head. "You came willingly," it whispered, voice thin and echoing like wind through dead branches. "They always do." I tried to speak, but my throat felt sewn shut. The air thickened, buzzing with unseen energy. My pulse hammered against my temples. Suddenly, the stones around the circle began shifting, groaning like ancient bones. A writhing shape emerged, humanoid but wrong. Its limbs stretched too far, its face featureless except for a single, cracked porcelain eye embedded where its left eye should have been. I stumbled back, my heel catching on a raised stone. My fingers scraped against cold, wet earth, and I realized with sickening clarity that the floor wasn't stone at all. It was graves. Dozens of uneven, nameless graves. I scrambled to my feet, heart pounding in my chest like a trapped bird. The thing with the porcelain eye twitched and jerked, moving like a marionette controlled by broken strings. "What do you want?" His head tilted with a sharp crack. The warped voice of the doll hissed again, though its unmoving face never shifted. "A trade. One soul for another. Escape. If you can." I felt a horrible weight settle over me. Blackthorn House never intended for anyone to leave, not unless a replacement took their place. In the shadows beyond the stone circle, figures began to stir. More of them, twisted like forgotten toys, their bodies fused with parts of the house itself. A woman with glassy, shattered eyes. A man whose hands were wooden like clawed chair arms. They stared with silent, desperate longing. They had all come before me. They had all tried. Panic surged through me, adrenaline crashing like a violent wave. I couldn't reason with whatever force controlled this place, but maybe I could play its game. The doll's voice hissed again, almost amused. "Run, if you dare." The twisted figures lunged as I bolted, skidding past the crumbling graves. My hand grazed something cold, an old iron key, half buried in the dirt. Its surface was etched with runes matching the ones on the stone circle. I stuffed it into my pocket and ran, following the faint, flickering light of the burning runes. Behind me, the marionette thing shrieked, a sound of rage mixed with something far worse. Fear. Maybe I wasn't supposed to find the key. Maybe it was left behind by someone who had played this game before me and lost. The labyrinth twisted endlessly, walls shifting like a living maze. The ticking clock grew louder, echoing with each pounding step. I didn't know where I was going, but the key felt warm in my hand, pulling me forward. At last, I saw it. A door, massive, iron-bound, ancient beyond comprehension. Its surface shimmered faintly, etched with the same cursed runes. I jammed the key into the rusted lock just as the marionette thing came skittering into view. Its limbs twisted at impossible angles. Its porcelain eye gleamed, filled with hate. "You can't leave," it hissed, almost afraid. "You belong here." With a final, desperate twist, the lock clicked. The door swung open into a swirling, endless abyss of light and darkness. A void that felt like falling through time itself. Hands, cold and brittle, grabbed at my arms, trying to drag me back. But the pull of the door was stronger. It yawned wide, consuming everything. The stone circle, the twisted marionette thing, and the clawing hands dragging at my arms. The air roared with a howling wind that seemed to tear reality apart. For a moment, I thought I was dead, ripped into nothingness, but instead, I was falling. Endlessly, the dark swallowed me, cold and silent, leaving only the sound of my ragged breathing. No ground, no up or down, just the infinite abyss. I tumbled helplessly through the void until something shifted beneath me. A sudden stop, and I slammed into freezing, damp stone. Pain exploded in my chest. I gasped, struggling to breathe, blinking against the suffocating darkness. The iron key was still clutched in my trembling hand, its ancient runes faintly glowing, my only light. As I forced myself to my feet, the cold stone beneath me felt wrong. The texture was rough, uneven, like old gravestones fused together. Faint, jagged lines crisscrossed the floor, forming strange patterns that twisted my eyes the longer I stared. Ahead loomed a massive archway, carved from blackened stone, its surface pulsing faintly with familiar runes. Beyond it stretched a long, endless corridor lit by flickering, sickly green flames floating in midair. The air felt charged, thick with old magic and something far worse. I hesitated but knew there was no going back. I stepped through the archway. The hall seemed alive, its shifting walls breathing in time with my racing pulse. Whispers filled the air, faint, distorted voices calling out in fragmented sentences. "Find me. It hurts. No escape." I couldn't tell where they came from. Above, behind, inside my head. They twisted and bled together like broken radio signals. As I moved forward, the portraits lining the walls drew my attention. Each face twisted into expressions of terror or despair. The longer I stared, the more familiar they seemed, until I realized they were all the same person. Me. Every portrait was a distorted version of my face. Some older, some twisted beyond recognition, eyes hollow and mouths stretched into silent screams. I staggered back, heart pounding in my throat. Was this the future the house had planned for me? At the end of the corridor stood another door, tall, ancient, carved with symbols far older than the runes on the key. It radiated power, humming with an ominous energy. But there was something else, something behind me. I turned slowly, every instinct screaming to run. The marionette thing emerged from the shadows, its limbs twisted even further, its face now split into a grotesque grin, stretched too wide. Its porcelain eye burned like molten hate. "You shouldn't have come this far," it hissed, voice sharp and brittle like shattered glass. "There is no freedom, no ending, only the house, and us." It lunged with inhuman speed, arms outstretched like snapping branches. I ran. I threw myself at the ancient door, jamming the key into the lock. The symbols on its surface burned white-hot, searing my palm, but I held on, forcing the key to turn even as the marionette's claws grazed my back. With a final, ear-splitting crack, the door swung open, a brilliant, blinding light spilling out, swallowing the corridor, the marionette, and the twisted reality of Blackthorn House. I stumbled forward, falling again, this time into blinding sunlight. The scent of damp earth and autumn leaves filled the air. I hit the ground hard, gasping. It took me several long, shuddering breaths before I realized I was outside. The forest stretched endlessly around me, bathed in the soft light of dawn. Birds sang somewhere distant, real birds. The wind whispered through the trees, carrying no hidden malice. I laughed, a broken, trembling sound, and collapsed onto the dirt. Somehow, I was free. But then, something cold pressed against my hand. I looked down and felt my breath hitch. The iron key was still there, its runes now faded and lifeless. But carved into its surface was something new, escaped at a cost. Before I could react, I heard the faintest sound from the woods behind me, the soft, lilting notes of a tinny waltz. My breath hitched. Every nerve in my body screamed run, but my legs felt anchored to the cold, damp earth. The melody twisted on the wind, warped and broken, like a music box left too long in the rain. I turned slowly, heart pounding. The forest stretched dark and endless behind me, tangled branches clawing at the pale morning sky. The sound shouldn't have carried this far, but it was unmistakable. That cursed, familiar waltz. I stumbled backward, nearly tripping over roots half buried in the dirt. Was I still in the house? Had I ever truly left? My fingers clenched around the iron key still burning cold in my pocket. Its carved runes pulsed faintly, as if listening. Suddenly, the wind died, leaving the woods shrouded in eerie silence. The waltz continued, closer now. I forced myself to move, limbs trembling with exhaustion. Every step felt like dragging weights through thick mud. The woods pressed in, tighter, suffocating, branches twisting into grotesque shapes that watched without eyes. I could still see faint tracks in the damp earth, my own footprints from when I had first arrived, leading back to where the house should have been. But there was nothing now, only tangled forest and rotting leaves. The music swelled. Desperate, I called out, "Who's there?" My voice shattered the stillness, brittle and sharp. No reply, only the relentless waltz, circling through the trees like something alive. Then I saw it, a faint light in the distance, flickering like a candle. My breath hitched again. Someone, or something, was out there. I stumbled toward the light, fighting the instinct to flee in the opposite direction. If there was any chance someone else was here, a way out, I had to try. But with each step, the forest twisted tighter, the path narrowing until branches clawed at my arms like brittle fingers. Cold sweat trickled down my neck. The light pulsed rhythmically in time with the waltz, flickering like an old gas lamp. I emerged into a small, overgrown clearing. There, standing in the center, was an old, crumbling street lamp, its cracked glass faintly glowing with unnatural light. Beneath it lay something half-buried in the dirt. A doll. Its porcelain face was cracked, its eyes hollow, but its mouth was smiling, wide and fractured. I staggered back, choking on a sharp gasp. The music swelled louder, too close, inside my head. The earth trembled beneath me as if something ancient and hungry stirred below. Roots writhed, splitting the ground. I tried to run, but the clearing stretched endlessly, looping back to the same street lamp and that grotesque doll lying at its base. Then I saw something worse. Scattered objects lay half-hidden among the roots. An old, rusted watch, a locket, a shoe, cracked and worn. Forgotten things, lost things. They didn't belong to me, but somehow I recognized them. The sound of footsteps echoed behind me, slow, deliberate. My mouth went dry as I turned. Emerging from the darkness was a figure, a tall, warped silhouette limping unevenly on twisted limbs. Its head tilted, neck snapping at a grotesque angle. Its single porcelain eye gleamed faintly in the dim light. "You left, but you belong here," it hissed, voice jagged and metallic. "You never left." I backed away, heart slamming against my ribs. The marionette thing lurched closer, each step a disjointed snap of wood and bone. Its twisted smile widened as its clawed fingers reached for me. "Stay forever." Desperate, I yanked the iron key from my pocket, holding it like a weapon. Its faded runes flared weakly, flickering like a dying ember, but still alive. You're Afraid of this, the thing recoiled, hissing, its face twisting into something angrier and afraid. Suddenly, the air around me pulsed, and the ground split wider, revealing something deeper. A dark, endless chasm lined with those same cursed runes, ancient and hungering. Is this the way out? I gasped. The marionette lunged in blind fury, but I threw the key into the chasm with all my strength. The runes blazed like fire. The wind howled, dragging the thing backward, its limbs splintering as the earth tore apart, swallowing it whole. Its porcelain I locked onto mine one last time, pleading, desperate, before the abyss devoured it. I woke up on the side of an empty road, dawn breaking in the distance. My hands were empty, the iron key gone. My car sat abandoned nearby, half covered in frost. The woods behind me were still, silent. I told myself it was over, that I was free. But sometimes, when the wind blows just right, I still hear that warped, tinny waltz drifting from the distant trees,